The director of the production of Next to Normal.
I'm Bessel. I wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score that seeks to have become a man.
Hi, I'm Brittany Michaels. I'm the medical director of the Brien Center. I just want to thank Barrington Stage for hosting this event and showing this amazing work of art too. Next to Normal. I hope everyone sees it.
And hi, I'm Mary Cahilly. I'm the Senior Mental Health and Wellness Therapist on our Health and Performance team at King Range. And I'm really super excited to be here.
I'm Shepard. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a fellow at the Austen Riggs Center and also very grateful to be here.
I'm going to start with Bessel, who I got to meet on Friday, right before you saw the show. So I'd love for you to kick us off. You probably have, I see lots of pages of notes for there. You probably have lots of things to say, so go for it. The floor is yours.
So, first of all, this is an astonishing play. It's a play of genius, I think, to be able to delineate so many aspects of the human condition, and I doubt whether there's anybody in this room who could not identify with one part of this play or another. And so it's a sort of polarized in the play, but in reality, it shows so many things of what we all struggle with. And so what was central for me in the play is how interdependent we all are. And that's really a missing link in psychiatry, where we are social creatures. I was actually part of the people who can be blamed on creating the DSM originally. And we talked about people as individual organisms, and slowly over time I tried to introduce the notion that we actually are all part of larger groups, and we're independent. And the moment I started to talk about love and attachment on the DSM task force, it was as if I had farted. Don't talk about love and attachment. That's not scientific. But the reality is that we are all interconnected, and our brains and minds are shaped to adapt ourselves to the environment that we live in. So who we are is always interpersonal, and the meaning of life, of course, is our connection with other human beings. And what we saw so beautifully in the play is the disconnection between human beings, but also our deep obligation and sense and commitment to take care of each other. And his father in the play is a wonderful example that we all get our identity and our sense of meaning by having meaningful relationships with people who we care for. And we always take responsibility for each other if we make a commitment to each other. And part of being in love, in a loving relationship, is that you try to help each other to create a better life. And so what do you run into when you cannot help your partner to feel safe and to feel connected? And that's again something that probably many people in this room have experienced. We are so deeply interconnected that we want to belong, we want to be seen, we want to be known, and we want to give to the people we do. I thought Natalie was an exquisite example. I found Natalie actually the most compelling character in the whole play, of this girl who wants to be a member of the family and who cannot be seen because everybody is being hijacked by so-called mental illness of the mom. And so she cannot allow herself to feel loved and to be connected because her primary her orientation is, I need to belong to this family and I need to be seen by my family. And I see this all the time in our clinical practice, that some people just keep spending their whole lives trying to become acceptable and seen by the family they come from, and that can require an enormous amount of energy. So we are intertwined. And then when we live in systems, one person gets denoted as the caregiver, another person becomes the mentally ill person, and the next person becomes the troublemaker. And so we get locked in these roles within our families, and we also have a tendency to play out these roles for the rest of our lives because we are shaped by our earlier attachment patterns that are become very determinant of who we are after that. Another thing that strikes me about the play is that I was trained in a very good time in psychiatry. We didn't know anything. And we knew that we know anything. And so in my training in Harvard National Health Center, there was a saying, and it was a very prestigious program to go into, and our main teacher said, in the first year of your training, you're not allowed to read any textbooks. You only have one textbook, and that's your patients. And I will be eternally grateful for having just spent innumerable hours sitting with people, trying to understand who they are. And that has sort of disappeared because people like me, I was a minor character in that, created this atrocious diagnostic manual called the DSM, which has absolutely no scientific validity. And how it came into being is that we discovered that certain drugs have a positive effect on mental illness. And in order to be able to do research and to agree on things, we created something called the Research Diagnostic Manual, a list of symptoms, so that people in Los Angeles and Boston and London doing research can agree on the sort of people that we're treating. When that first came out, and the first DSM came out, it said, this is just a list of symptoms. It has no scientific validity, and it should never be used for forensic or insurance purposes. That sentence has left out of subsequent edition of DSM, and now people actually believe that these conduct disorders exist. They're just a list of symptoms, and I think psychiatry has deeply lost its way by doing that. This woman is called bipolar. I don't know what that means in her case. She gets an identity of, you are bipolar. You may also be a great pianist, you may also be a great gardener, a great painter, but psychiatry does. We look at what is wrong with people and not what people have as assets. So we focus on how you are fucked up rather than what else we have going in your life. What is working and what isn't working. So we really got very distorted in our orientation towards people. And then the next thing happens, as happens in the play so painfully, is that people start becoming their diagnosis. And they start saying, I'm a borderline. And that excuses all that I do. I'm a bipolar person. I may also be a great parent. I may also be a great pianist. I may also be a writer. So we get defined by the labels that get pasted on us, and then the insurance companies run the lives that we have. And psychiatry as a discipline has been all too eager to embrace this rather delusional system of looking at human beings. And part of what's happened is so sad, is that we knew we didn't know anything back in the 70s when I trained, 60s, 70s. And so we were wide open to try things. I happen to have done the first studies on Zoloft and Prozac for PTSD. The results were not bad. But boy, did I become a respected person in psychiatry because I studied drugs. But what our findings was, it doesn't work all that well for most people. So I went on and started to study other things. Like I did the first study in yoga. Yoga is not part of the psychiatric armamentarium, and it turned out that yoga is a very effective treatment for a range of issues. I did this first study on EMDR, this crazy thing where you wiggle fingers in front of people's eyes. Most psychiatrists don't get trained in EMDR. I did a first study on neurofeedback, brain-computer interface stuff, where you can calm your brain down. The people in the play probably would have benefited greatly from neurofeedback, but psychiatry became a drug-addicted discipline, so it's always about what other drug can we find for you. The last 10 years I've done psychedelic research. We did spectacular research. We got a prize. The journal Science, the foremost in the world, Science magazine, declared one of our studies one of the 10 greatest breakthroughs in science of the year. Last week the FDA declared MDMA psychedelics illegal, so it cannot be treated. So our profession is closed and is a servant of the drug industry. So things are different. No, what else can I say? The whole issue of Natalie is really very much on my mind, of how she tries to create a life that is focused on her current family. And that brings on the whole issue of memory and who we are, and talking. So there's this underlying assumption that you can either talk or give people drugs. That's not true. You can also move. You can also do theater. And one of the things we have studied, we got a grant from the CDC, to study theater as a treatment of various mental illness. And being able to be an actor and to embody certain roles and to feel what it feels like to be a mighty warrior or something or that gives your body a sense of how can I be different? How can I live in different environments? So our discipline has become very, very narrow-minded. But one of the things I love about Austen Riggs, for example, is your fantastic theater program run by Kevin Coleman. And I sometimes wonder, may that not be the most effective thing that you do at Austen Riggs? I'd like to hear you about it. The other thing is, your body needs to feel safe. Over time, I've become very suspicious of mental hospitals, and I send more people to Kenyon Bench when they get really upset than to mental hospitals. Because at Kenyon Bench, they know how to make people feel safe in their bodies and to feel calm. So there are so many more things that we keep ignoring and we get partialized. And one of the problems in our profession is that therapists tend to get very religious. They say, I have learned EMDR or something or that, and then you start believing that their method cures everything. No method cures everything. What is intriguing for me in this play is the mother is so disconnected from everybody, makes everybody feel terrible, but the moment that she decides to sort of leave psychiatry and go on her own, she makes a connection with her daughter. The first meaningful connection, the whole play. And she says, I'm in charge. And so to some degree, this whole becoming a patient can be a very dangerous thing for people, because you become the role that the world puts you into. What this play also really brings up to me is my greatest hero in the history of psychiatry is a Frenchman by the name of Pierre Genet, who wrote some books back in the 19th century, and he says, every life is an act of creation cobbled together with the best means of their disposal. I think that's a beautiful definition of who we are. And so I'm really very curious what my fellow panelists will say about this. But this play was a stunning play, and I'm really so grateful you put it on.
Let's head on down the line. Dr. Michaels, reactions to seeing the play. You saw the opening night with us.
I did. I did see it opening night, and I also had just come in from Copenhagen that day. So I was afraid I would fall asleep, but that didn't happen because it really was so powerful and so captivating and surprising in its honesty. And I was so impressed with the portrayal of the people. The mom, the dad, the daughter, and the son who had passed away. So while I sat in the audience, I was thinking about the audience. And I've said this to a few people, because I think it was a very accurate portrayal of what people go through when they're struggling with a mental illness. And I thought of people in the audience who maybe have had their own mental illness or grew up with a family member with one, and didn't have the opportunity to talk about it, because we tend not to talk about these things. You know, these are stigmatized problems. People keep them close to their heart. So I think I spoke to people here that, some people had to leave. Some people were in the lobby crying. It really struck them deeply. which ultimately I think is a good thing, but it speaks for the need of more conversation, more discussion. As far as thinking about the people in the play, I wish I had the chance to talk to all of them. The psychiatrists, I agree with you. They were very focused on the next pill, the next treatment. What was missing in the play with the psychiatrists, and I think in general in treatment, is a holistic engagement with the people we serve. Instead of looking for the pill or the one therapy, connecting with that one person and understanding where they are at and what they're experiencing. And the next step is what we call shared decision making. I may have the best pill in the world, but if you don't want it, you shouldn't have to take it. And if you have kids and that's a priority, that's part of your treatment. And too frequently, I should say, we ignore what patients have in their lives, and they're seen just as mentally ill people. They're defined, they're schizophrenic, they're bipolar, versus what we call person-first language. They are people who have schizophrenia, people who have this other illness, and also, as you said, which I think is so important, our mothers, our teachers, our community members. So I think it stirred up so much, and it's not like the end of the discussion, but the beginning of a longer discussion, a hopeful discussion. So, thank you.
Hi, as I was watching the play, I was struck on so many levels. Natalie as well was one of my favorite characters. The bulk of my career over the last 25 years has been working with the Natalies and the Dans, and really looking at the ripple effects of mental illness. And I started my career off with mostly working in the field of addictions treatment, working with street workers in Denver, and helping them to overcome addictions so that they could maintain custody of their children and that type of thing. And it was raw, and it was difficult, it was painful, and it was also something where there was a great deal of shame around that. And as my career progressed, I saw a lot of what Bessel was talking about, where we were trying to figure out, okay, what's the diagnosis here? And everybody got bipolar. And is that accurate? Well, no, maybe this is complex PTSD. And we actually had, this is many years ago, we had a discussion with Bessel in my office with our team in terms of what are we looking at here? What is going on? And we had to take into account the attachment needs of each one of our patients. Each one of them had gone through a life history where maybe they were seen but not seen. Maybe they were invisible. I burst into tears with The Invisible Girl, because it's so spot on. When there is a mental illness, everything else often fades into the background as everybody's doing the best they can to cope. And so in that, then we develop patterns. And those patterns, we need to ask, okay, why do we have these patterns? They're not bad. They came about in an effort to adapt. And in that adaptation, it worked in that time. As Natalie then turned to some drugs and things like that, that made absolute sense. It was not a bad person. She was doing the best she could to cope. Now, when I'm at Canyon Ranch, I see adults in their worlds who are successful and lonely, successful and scared, successful, and how do I do this in my life? Because they have those coping strategies that they have worked with, but it's not working anymore. And so when they come into my office at mental health at Canyon Ranch, because we're not a treatment facility, I have usually one shot to work with them. And so we're looking at what's going on in your neurobiology, what's happening, where has your body gotten stuck with these different traumas, with these different emotions, and then how can we work to free those? So we're using things like brain spotting, we're using mindfulness, we're using meditation, and then I'm saying get out there with outdoor sports, get the sun on your face, go hang out in the pool, go do a yoga class, go talk with one of our spiritual wellness folks, And for me as a practitioner with so many years under my belt, I am ecstatic that our people have the opportunity to have access to all of that. And then if I'm lucky, they'll come back and they'll tell me, hey, I feel great. And often they do. And so this play I was so grateful for because it depicted where some of these things happen. There's often a lineage of this kind of pain, and that when we talk about it, when we bring it out into the open, we can start to interrupt that lineage. And it gave me a great deal of hope. And so I'm super happy that we are doing this in our community here in Pittsfield, in the Berkshires, and that we're talking about it and that you all are here. So, thank you.
So first off, I want to just congratulate everyone involved with the production, the entire cast, and the entire creative team. It was very, very moving, and I will say difficult to watch for me at times, especially the scenes with this psychiatrist who plays multiple. The same actor plays multiple different psychiatrists. For those who haven't seen it, but there was kind of a. I kept wondering if it was an implication that they're all kind of the same, and not really getting it, despite maybe their best intentions. And I felt bad for the actor because I was sitting kind of close to the front, and for almost all of those scenes I was looking down, having trouble watching. And I thought I teach residents a lot, so people who are training to be psychiatrists, and I had this wish that everyone I work with could watch this production and that we could discuss how, as clinicians, we can have potentially, again, the best intentions and really miss what's going on in front of us, which is what I thought was very powerfully portrayed. So some people have said similar things, but let me say it slightly differently. That there was a lot of different so-called symptoms. So psychiatry came out of a medical model where you look at other diseases, and diseases have symptoms, and symptoms you try to find the biological correlate, but it works really different in mental health. And one of the things to think about symptoms, which I think you spoke quite clearly about, is that in some ways they're all solutions. And what was, I think, missing in a lot of the conversations in the production, and which kept becoming clear, was, well, what are the ways that people were doing the best they could? And if these are solutions, even if they're not completely conscious solutions, it would make it, even with, again, the best pills in the world, the best biological treatments in the world, the best so-called therapy in the world, why would someone change? Unless there's some different solution that comes about. And I think that those different solutions could take a lot of different forms, but one of the things that really struck me in the play was how people were spending a lot of time together, but not really speaking about what was going on, about what was, there's grief. I think that's not spoiling anything to say that grief is an element, and that couldn't be spoken to. And there's this idea that what can't be spoken to and what can't be felt, it's not just, there's the importance of language, but also in the physical body, finds other ways of taking expression. And I think we see that throughout in the play. So my hope, like if I was working with residents watching this or other trainees, to think about, well, how could we facilitate both conversations and spaces for people to be able to talk about and feel these things? And just say something about the theater. And by the way, I think that the theater program at Austen Riggs is fantastic, but I don't also want to criticize the art program, the nursery school, and the greenhouse, which are all also, I think, equally fantastic. And for similar reasons, because I think all of them facilitate a kind of play space, which theater does so well. And ideally, all clinical encounters, at least the way that I like to think about it, have the same potential. And I use the word potential because another way of talking about it is a potential space. A space where people can have an opportunity to get unstuck. And so, there's an idea in both psychotherapy, and I also think in theater, that there's a space where people are both not me and not me, which creates a play. in there, and the idea that something different might emerge. And so I mean, I think theater is remarkable, and this play is a remarkable forum for that. And but I also think that clinical encounters are as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So Alan, Bessel, do you mind handing your mic? To play a little game. So Alan, how did you as the director go about navigating all of this?
I wish you'd all been in my
I
rehearsals.
know.
Yeah, next time. Well, first of all, I want to say that we have some of the cast members here, the not so invisible Madison McBride, who plays Natalie. It's interesting. I think we started the summer off with La Cage, which was a musical about joy and about other things too. And I wanted a serious antidote in the second half of the summer because I think, besides, the wonder of escaping life, and we've had a lot to escape from in the theater, plays and musicals should touch on things that matter and matter to the community. And sometimes that's easy and sometimes it isn't. And I found that very important. And this musical has always fascinated me. It came out in 2008 and premiered the pre-Broadway tryout was in Washington, D.C. And then this production started in Washington, D.C. We played to sold-out audiences for all of January, February, and March. And I thought in Washington that we would do it to get young people in the theater because it's a rock score and that young people would come to it for those reasons. And it turned out that the audience in Washington looked a lot like this room. And what I realized is that every family, every person who's lived long enough has gone through trauma. Along with the mental health aspects of the show, people lose people, and families are broken or have unspoken things because of that. And so the amount of kind of emotional response to it, I was unprepared for. I think we did the show 50-something times this winter, and so far we've been doing it for 2 weeks, and there hasn't been a single performance where the audience has not leapt up to their feet at the very end of the show, which speaks to the power of the piece. Who's seen the production in the room? A lot of people. One of the things that I thought was exciting for me when I was putting this together was that there are 7 live cameras around the theater capturing the actors when they perform, sometimes very up close. Most of it is live. A couple moments are pre-recorded. Natalie's eye is pre-recorded because an actor once said something to me that I will never forget, and it's so true. He said to me, Alan, what's interesting about the eyes is that you could look into someone's eyes that's been in love with you for 20 years and realize just from a look that they're no longer in love with you. Without a single word. And I thought I wanted to capture the experience of that as up close as you can. And I also wanted to stress the point that sometimes we don't even know the people in our own lives. Our parents can remain a mystery to us, and we've lived with them for so many years. A spouse, you can find out secrets and parts of their internal life that you didn't know. And the point has been made several times that these 3 people are living in a house. They spend all their time with each other, and they remain unseen or able to see each other. And what's fascinating to me that I think you said is that we're all in the play playing out the various roles that we've been assigned in the family, and we're stuck in them. And what appears to be a very healthy, very happy marriage at the beginning of the play breaks apart because it turns out when you take the ingredient out of her treatment, these 2 people are quite different. And I find that so interesting. And it was really a joy to work on it with the actors. I was reading Bessel's book. There's a chapter on theater, and if you haven't read the book, you should read it, #1. But I was particularly fascinated by this chapter because it talks about what it means to embody other people and how that activates your emotions and makes you get involved. And I was fascinated both what that process is for a non-actor who is trying to awaken something in themselves or feel like a warrior. You know, there was an exercise talked about in the book where people had to gradually look each other in the eye, which is a fascinating thing that actors go through. And it's a very different experience for an actor. One thing that we haven't talked about that your book made me think about is, has anyone heard the term intimacy coordinator? It's become a thing in movies, TV, theater. When you have to do a particularly intimate scene, when you have to kiss, when you have to, if there's nudity, usually that wasn't handled with any care before. It was handled by a director, and now people are brought into the process to handle that. And part of that is because if you have to kiss someone on stage, your body doesn't know that it's just another actor. I mean, that's, you know, so actors go through really interesting things when they have to go through these extreme emotions. And so I'm fascinated by that and then all the aspects of that. But it's been a pleasure to put on the show for you, and we have 2 more weeks. So if your friends haven't seen it, please tell them to come.
There's 2 issues that I'd like to talk about. One is the issue of mental illness. And that is that, you know, everybody in this play reminded me of my family. Nobody in my family was ever diagnosed as being mentally ill. That's purely a social construct in a way. And we, you know, I doubt that there's many people in the audience who don't really identify with possibly all characters. And so people get labeled as being mentally ill at some point, but we all have our mishigas, you know, we all have our craziness inside of ourselves. And so we have our roles. The other thing that I'm concerned about is the confusion of trauma with other stuff. Trauma is not the ultimate explanatory thing. And it's interesting, my book has become so popular, and now everything becomes trauma. But real bipolar illness, which used to be called manic depressive illness, is a true biological illness. And really, I happen to know something about it, outdated by now. I claim, although other people claim the same thing, that I was the first person to give lithium to people with manic depressive illness. And boy, did it work. There were people who'd be high as a kite every May and suicidally depressed every October, and families of devastating suicides. And once we introduced lithium, people became steady. And so there are multiple factors right now, because trauma is something we can understand and do something about. Everything is reduced to trauma, but there's more to life than trauma. It's also, again, many people in this room have neuroatypical children. One of my kids, which I talk about, he gave me permission to talk about it in my book, was an extremely neuroatypical child. And that is a very hard thing for families to deal with. We saw it again at the Democratic National Convention this past week, and that colors your family. My son, because he comes from an educated, knowledgeable family, he is a spectacularly successful, well-adjusted adult, because the environment made it possible for him to continue to grow out of his neuroatypicality. If my kid had been poor and raised a housing project, he would probably be in the Institute for the Criminally Insane. But there's a truth. Many of us start off with neuroatypical adaptations, which are important to understand and adapt to. And then that has a big impact on one's social environment. So there's more to life than trauma. But one more thing about it is that what is the essence of trauma is that you get stuck there. And that whole thing keeps organizing your perception. And then the big challenge for us is, how do we change the habitual way in which we look at the world? And for that you need to have deep experiences that directly contradict your habits. My favorite example is basic training in the military. Who joins the military? Not the cream of the crop. People often join the military out of poverty and terrible circumstances. These are tough kids to deal with. But if you go to basic training, you get through extremely difficult exercises that really challenge you to the max. And after 12 weeks of basic training, you're going, wow, I'm an amazing person. I survived basic training. So there are ways of changing those habits, and our job as therapists is what is the best way of changing people's habits, and what's the best way of adapting, managing these neural patterns that are genetics type patterns, biological patterns, but we don't do that. I spent 10 years studying neurofeedback, where you can really rewire the brain and patterns of the brain. We wrote 3 research papers on it. Nobody does neurofeedback, or very few people do. It's not done to the mainstream. So we keep sort of ignoring to be really much more precise in what is happening here. And it's not all trauma. But if it's trauma, you need to deal with the trauma. The best treatment of trauma is EMDR, picking your fingers in front of people's face, crazy treatment, and psychedelics, which has not been declared illegal. So we have a lot of complex issues to face. Thank you.
So you've all talked about how mental health is portrayed in the show, and a lot of questions here about how realistic is that portrayal. So as Alan mentioned, the show was 16 years old. I think they actually started writing over 20 years ago. So a lot has happened in your field in 20 years. How does Diana's treatment reflect, apart from the choreography and the rock star therapist, how does it portray kind of how realistic is it from your point of view as practitioners? Specifically, lots of questions about the ECT.
Well, ECT is still being used, and ECT became here the bête noire. Sometimes ECT can be very helpful. Also, ECT can be very harmful. And particularly with people, if you do ECT for traumatized people, it's devastating. But is it very helpful for deep endogenous depression? Yes, it is. It's never black or white. It's never one thing or the other.
Yeah, I could speak a little bit about that. Maybe on a kind of just sort of practical, basic level. I was surprised by the quantity of ECT that she was getting in, and that the concerns around cognition, at least in my experience, that's something that's regularly checked for, and it sort of came out of nowhere in the performance. And I just agree with Bessel that ECT is complicated because it has a very, very troubled history, and can be absolutely the wrong treatment for someone, and can also save lives in very profound ways when in the right context, for the right person and the right family. So I just think that's important to acknowledge the complexity of that.
I'm thinking about ECT because ECT is done at Berkshire Medical Center, and I'm on staff there, and I see some people on staff in the audience, and there's a very rigorous process that occurs before someone is given ECT. And ECT is, it comes with a lot of stigma, just like the illnesses it's supposed to treat, they are stigmatized. But there is a rigorous process. Very few people receive it, and the people who do, for the most part, are very desperate and suffering. There are a few advocates like Kitt, some others, famous people. That was the one area of the play that I cringed a little bit because it looked like her memory was gone, and I agree with you that we didn't see the part where the doctor is checking and monitoring. And I felt like maybe that was not the most accurate part of the play. I think, did you also ask what's changed since 2008? Was that part of this question? Or
yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted, focus a little bit on the positive, which we haven't talked about, which that there have been a few dramatic transformations in the field of helping people who have psychiatric stuff going on. And one that I just want to mention is peer support.
That's not exactly new. That's only millennia old.
Excuse me?
That's life. Peer
That's
support.
life. Well,
Not new.
I'm just going to say, you could always be a peer support, but now you can get paid to do that job.
The insurance companies.
You can get trained. You can get trained to do that job, and you can get certified to do that job. And this is a game changer. So, if we think about 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was a hierarchy. There was the doctor on top, and then the nurse, and maybe there was an aide, and the doctor kind of dictated what would happen. It was very uneven, and oftentimes patients didn't have a voice. They didn't have a role model. They didn't have a mentor, and there was a lot of shaming and blaming. So I want to advocate for peer support or recovery coaches, because these are people with lived experience in our community who have gone through the work to help themselves, which is extremely powerful and meaningful, transformational, and now have, as part of their recovery, want to help other people. And so, for example, at the Brien Center, we have people with lived experience who are certified. They work with people who may have a mental illness or a substance use disorder, and they work in a professional way to advocate, support them, mentor them on their path to recovery. So that is a very significant shift, and it's meaningful because it empowers people who have these problems to, get rid of that hierarchy. They are game changers for the people we serve, because they have an insight that maybe someone who has not had these illnesses, that they have that. They lived it.
The field of trauma started with peer support. It started with Judy Herman and myself in Boston very much. I worked with veterans. I am not a veteran. I don't know anything what it's like to be a soldier. And we had groups of veterans who worked together and talked to each other. I was the student in the group and not the authority in the group, and I learned about trauma from them. Our model was peer support. Maybe you're not old enough to remember that, but that's where we started. Judy Herman is not an incest victim. She started off with groups of incest survivors, as I did also at some point, and they helped each other because they knew it. And then the insurance companies came in and said, you need to be licensed in order to help other people. And then our whole culture got shifted towards hierarchies. Instead of being a student, people became the experts, and now you get a little degree, which I call a degree to malpractice, because you don't learn anything in school how to be a good therapist, and then your patients teach you how to be a good therapist. So that's where we started, with peer support, and it's only our social system that changed it around. So I'm glad you're back to where we started.
Yeah.
What would you see the role is of a spouse or significant other when someone's going through a mental health situation? What is Dan's role with Diana, and how can it be supportive?
Oh, I'd love to speak to that one. Because as I was watching Dan, he played it so beautifully, because his eyes were just kind of wide and glassy the whole time, and talking about it's all good. And really, in many ways, it was the way that he was trying to live into a fantasy that it was all good. And because of his own pain around grief, that's just the way I interpreted it, he couldn't quite allow himself to feel the nuances of just how difficult, painful life it can be, and therefore then he missed his daughter, didn't see what her needs were. And then I was actually sitting over there on opening night, and when Dan finally acknowledged his grief and just let himself feel, it was like, thank God, he's finally letting himself be human and not trying to be this super guy of trying to, pretend. And it was just, and even when Diana came out of her treatment And at one point, she's very clear, and she says, talk to me. Talk to me about what has happened. What am I missing? And Dan refused to go there with her because she was no longer participating in the fantasy. And he wanted her to be different, but he didn't want her to be real. And that's the danger. When we avoid what's going on, we step into this unreality and we miss each other. And we need each other. And when she finally said, no, I'm going to go do my own thing, it forced him to get real. And so when I meet with someone and they're in that role of, okay, this is the fantasy, this is what I want. Okay, well, this is what you want, and let's explore some of that. Let's also see what's going on underneath. What is happening under here that may need to be addressed? Because if it's not addressed, it's going to fester, and it's going to get in the way.
Well, what also struck me about his role is how one gets trapped in needing to take care of one's partner. And if he had left, everybody would have blamed him. You're an awful man for having left this vulnerable woman. But she can leave, and we call her, she's liberating herself from him. And that's really very much what relationships are like. We try to take care of each other. And at what point do you say, I can't stand it anymore? And so I think a lot of people run into that. There's a lot of guilt about going your own way. And we need to take care of each other. What are the limits of our caretaking capacity? And so he really gets them all. I'm a caretaker, and that's who I am. And then she leaves him and says, who am I after I cannot be 30? I mean, these are incredibly complex issues.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me around that, I like the way you framed that, is the what's the line when caretaking becomes a kind of entrapping in a certain role of the other person as the one who needs to be taken care of, and how people can get stuck in that. And in terms of what I would hope is that someone could offer a space for Dan to be both reflective, to have space to talk about it, and space to feel. One of the things that was so impressive to me in the performance was the ways he mentioned his eyes, but I also felt that his entire body had moments of just withdrawal from what was going on, and then sort of a hyper engagement in it. And I just kept hoping that he could have a space to just slow that down and really reflect on what's going on and feel.
Yeah, I felt like Dan was in a chronic stress response. Fight or flight, like he was ready for the next battle. There was no rest, there was no relief. And when you are in a chronic stress response, which some of you might relate to, you don't plan, you're not reflecting, you're just trying to survive the day or that minute. And so that was my take on Dan. And just wishing that he had some space to take a breath and have support or have a space to do that.
Alan is chomping at the bit.
Thank you for our shared microphone. That was the most fun was to work with the actor Alan H. Green on the part, because Alan by nature is a very emotional man. He'll cry tears of joy. He's so sweet. And I kept saying, but Dan doesn't cry. He can't cry. And so take all of that and bottle it up. And so to do the rehearsal process was an exercise in pulling back. And I think most of you have seen the play, so I'm not spoiling it. The big surprise is that, their relationship is based on keeping their son's memory alive. And that's really what it is. So the moment Diana begins to try and move beyond that, he can't. And the final image when she leaves, you realize that Gabe has been living even bigger in his mind than hers, and that he hasn't even begun to deal with it yet. And it's an intense experience for him. And a lot of nights at the end of the show, especially the other theater we did, they would applaud the moment when he agreed to go into therapy. Go figure. So, but fascinating character, and wonderful performance by Alan.
real tough problem. It's a real agonizing issue. And like in the addiction world, you have the what do you call it, the surviving people, the family members of addicts. How responsible are you for your partner? How much can you separate yourself from the mental illness or the problems of your partner? It's an incredibly complex moral issue that people have to deal with.
We have a whole bunch of questions here. I'm going to solidify. There's a lot of questions about the definitions, the differences between bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and today's.
I just have one statement.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just want to mention for people living in our community, there are support groups for family members. There's NAMI, and I think there was there's some information outside, and there's also a meeting called Learn to Cope. These are all free. Learn to Cope is for people who love people who have substance use disorders, and NAMI is more for people who might love people who have a mental health issue. But it's a way to connect with other people and not be so isolated in dealing with what you're dealing with. So I just want to make sure people knew that.
Thank you. So yes, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, skipping that, moving on. Okay.
So we have a completely non-scientific diagnostic system. The sooner we get rid of this diagnosis, the better it is.
So let's talk, actually, Dr. Michaels. Since you have all of your such great resources, there's a lot of questions here about what to do if you have a loved one who you think is going through a mental health crisis, or what resources are available here in the Berkshires, and there's a lot. So how would you encourage someone to start to navigate that, either for themselves or for a loved one?
Well, it starts really with picking up the phone or just walking into a building. So I can talk about the Brien Center. We run the 24/7 crisis mobile unit, and we're located on Fenn Street, and we're available. Help is, I always say, help is a phone call away, and often picking up the phone is the hardest part of seeking help. I can't tell you how many people I see in my office. I'll say, this is the number, give them a call, and they just don't make the call. It's just so hard. And we have the ability to help people who are in acute crisis. Some people are struggling with suicidal thoughts and need help right away. Some people can walk in and have an appointment in our community behavioral health center. And we will assess you, and if you need therapy, we can help you find a therapist. If you need medication, we can help you with that too. And we really aim for holistic care. So there are those peer supports that I talked about, or recovery coaches, outreach workers. We partner with CHP because people sometimes have physical problems. We have other programs too, day programs, residential programs, programs for people who have developmental issues, or people who have more severe psychiatric issues and might need almost like a team to help them navigate the world. And I think the main thing is to make the phone call and then expect to get a treatment plan that's tailored for you. No cookie cutters, whether you end up at the Brien Center, you might end up at Austen Riggs or some other place. It should feel like your program, not something that came out of a book or as a formula. I just want to say there's something called evidence-based care, which is research-based care that helps providers figure out, like, which medicine should I use for this person. Evidence-based care has its place, but it's just a piece of a puzzle that we're creating with the person we're serving. It has to be shared decision-making to help them figure out how to navigate next steps. So I hope that answers the question. A little bit long, but.
Other resources?
Yeah, when folks come to Canyon Ranch, often they're coming to reset, to just get a break, to recharge themselves. And so often in the process of starting their program, they'll start with mental health. And we'll find out, okay, what is it? Why are you here? What are you looking for? If they're in an active crisis, we will sit with them and call the Brien Center. We will sit with them and call Austen Riggs. We will give them the resource that they need in that moment to get them to the right place. If it's not an active crisis, let's say they're coming in and they are overwhelmed by grief, or they're really worried about a family member, we'll walk them through. Now, how do you get resources in your community, wherever that happens to be? And so that we'll turn to the resources that we know, particularly things like Psychology Today, and places where we have contacts around the country, to let them know it is very, very important that you don't just take 3 or 4 days out of your life to reset and then go back to what it was. You've got to then continue and do some of these things with some ongoing therapy, some ongoing support.
Anything to add?
Dial 211.
I don't know if everyone heard that. That was the crisis number, I think you
It's
said?
a statewide information number for any kind of mental health or substance use or food insecurity or any of these things. 211.
211. Yep. That and. Oh. I don't know if anyone heard that better than me. For which line?
Warm line?
The Pure Run
Warm line.
Yeah. Do either of you know the? Yep.
Hi. Could I mention a few other resources in Berkshire County?
You need a microphone.
Hi, thank you. I just want to mention a few other resources in Berkshire County. I'm Brenda Butler. I'm the Medical Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Berkshire Medical Center and the Brien Center, and I'm the Training Director for our Psychiatry Residency Training Program. Every single one of these residents need to see this play. I'm going to make sure of that, first of all. But Berkshire Medical Center has an inpatient psychiatric unit. We also have our emergency room where people will come in directly to the emergency room if need be, if they're in an acute crisis, or sometimes we'll get sent from the Brien Center crisis team over to our emergency room if it looks like they need more intensive care, like an inpatient stay. We also have an adult partial hospital program, which is a really well-run program for adults who are sort of not acute enough to need inpatient stay, but not well enough to do just outpatient weekly visits or bi-weekly visits, so they come to the partial program. I had a youth suicide grant that began in 2015 and ended in 2021. From that, Berkshire Medical Center opened up an intensive outpatient program for youth. So we also have what's kind of a partial for youth. It meets after school hours, 5 days a week, for kids who are also in more acute crisis. And we have an outpatient consultation clinic, and we provide behavioral health consultations in primary care doctors. So it's interesting, there is really a lot in Berkshire County, and we have so many wonderful community organizations. There's the Berkshire Suicide Coalition. I'm probably not going to remember everybody. We have a number of wonderful community organizations here in Berkshire County. I think one of our major challenges is coordination of care and communication between the different organizations that exist. So do know that there is a lot here and that it's not easy to navigate sometimes, but there are a lot of resources here for people in need. That's all.
In closing, for the panelists, what do you think is probably the biggest stigma about mental health that you deal with? What you wish more people would know about your field and about treatment? So is such a stigma, and I love you mentioned a stigma around just getting ECT, a stigma around a stigma almost. What do you wish a barrier or stigma you could break down for the audience? Start with you, Kyle, because you're closest.
I mean, I think I wish that people knew that they weren't alone. The amount of times I hear people think that what they're experiencing no one has ever experienced before, or that no one will ever understand it, and that there's no possible way to have anything be different. I just wish that the message that all of those things are true. That any way that I could get that out to the world, I think that would be the most important thing.
For me, what I most want folks to know is that we're all in this together. We're human. To ask for help is not weakness. It's an act of courage. And it's an act of vulnerability that we all need. When folks come into my office, I usually internally I'm saying, hallelujah, you ended up here. And I'm letting them know it does take a great deal of courage to say, ouch, and to begin looking at our lives. And so that I just love folks when they are just so open.
I feel like stigma and mental illness, it's ubiquitous. So it's hard to say which one. If we think about institutional stigma, we're grossly underfunded. It's if you have a cardiac disease, you go and you get the appropriate care in a timely fashion. That's not been the case if you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. It's changing, but I think because of stigma, our society is able to underfund and not have parity, not have equality, whether it's a mental illness or physical illness. There's also social stigma. If you see someone bleeding out on the street, you're going to run and help that person. If you see somebody talking to themselves on the street, you're going to cross the street and run away or walk away. So there's stigma that's embedded in our culture. I think I agree with the two of you. What's most troubling is self-stigma. Of all the people who have significant mental illness, less than 10% of those people are engaged in psychiatric care. So most people who are struggling are not benefiting from some type of care. And if you get a chance, people come in, they talk to you. I see this a lot. I do a lot of substance use. People are terrified that someone will find out that they have been using heroin, or that they relapse with alcohol, or that they're hearing voices, and so they self-stigmatize, and it's very challenging. And again, that speaks to the need for more role models, more peers who have the bravery to talk out and kind of invite people into treatment. So thank you.
My dream is that in every school in America, from K through 12, they teach kids 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and self-regulation. And that we spend as much time teaching kids about who they are, what makes them feel good, what makes them feel calm. They should learn about breathing, they should learn about touch, they should learn about how moving with other people makes a difference. They need to have the language for themselves. They need to understand how their brain works, how their minds work, and it should be a quarter of the curriculum should be devoted to helping people not only to learn about what's out there, but also what's inside. And we should teach kids how to define themselves, how to talk about themselves, and what makes them feel calm and connected, and what they do in order to overcome unpleasant and difficult sensations in their bodies.
Alan, any closing thoughts?
How can I top what these 4 people said? I have nothing to add to that. It's so impressive. And, I just, before we finish, I want to thank all of you for being a part of this. I think it's so incredible to connect the art on the stage to the real issues that are going on in our world, in our community, and all of us. And pretty incredible that there's such alignment there. And I want to take a moment to thank Maura O'Sullivan and Lori Bashore and everyone on the team at Barrington City to put this together. I hope that in the future we can continue laughing with a wonderful panel on anti-Semitism that went along with The Happiest Man on Earth and Cabaret. This year we have this. And I hope the art continues to engage with the really, really interesting challenges of our time.